I used to believe that trust was the most natural thing in the world. You raise your children, you help your neighbors, you keep your promises, and you assume others will do the same. For most of my life, that belief held true. My husband, Peter, and I built a quiet life in a small suburban town, the kind with tidy lawns and neighbors who waved from their driveways. We raised one daughter, Anna, and when Peter passed away, she became the center of my world. Losing him was the hardest thing I'd ever faced. For months afterward, the house felt too large, too quiet. I filled the emptiness with small routines, baking on Sundays, watering the plants at sunrise, volunteering at the library. Anna visited often, bringing laughter and a little chaos, the kind that reminded me life was still moving forward. When she met Ethan, I was simply happy to see her smile again. Ethan had the sort of charm that fills a room. He was confident, polite, the kind of man who looked people straight in the eye and made them feel seen. He brought me flowers on my birthday, offered to mow the lawn when Peter's old mower stopped working, and always insisted on paying for dinner when we went out together. "He's different, Mom," Anna told me once. "He listens." I wanted to believe her. After years of grief, it was comforting to imagine that the universe was giving her a gentle place to land. They married in the spring. The ceremony was small but beautiful. White roses, a string quartet, sunlight filtering through stained glass. I stood beside my daughter and watched her promise forever to a man who, at that moment, seemed to deserve her completely. I remember thinking Peter would have approved. He always wanted someone who would protect her as fiercely as he did. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Ethan got a good job at a marketing firm, Anna taught art at the local elementary school, and they moved into a cozy house only a few blocks from mine. Sundays became our family ritual. I'd cook a big meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie, and they'd come over to eat, laugh, and tell me about their week. Ethan always asked about my investments, too. "Just making sure you're secure, Mom," he'd say lightly, using the nickname he'd started calling me soon after the wedding. It sounded caring, almost protective. At first, I found his interest thoughtful. Peter had left me a comfortable nest egg, and I was careful with it. Ethan would sit at the table with his laptop, showing me articles about online banking and how I could get better returns if I moved some of my savings into newer, high-yield accounts. He made it sound so harmless, so modern. "You're too trusting of old banks," he said once, smiling. "They're dinosaurs. Let me help you set something better up." I remember laughing. "You're the tech expert, not me. Just don't lose my life savings." He grinned. "Never, Mom. Your family." Weeks passed. Life felt ordinary again, pleasantly ordinary. Then little things began to shift. Anna called less. Ethan always seemed busy. When I'd stop by their house unannounced, he'd answer the door halfway, saying Anna was resting or working on something. Still, I told myself not to overthink. Newlyweds need space. One chilly November morning, he dropped by with his usual confidence and a USB drive. "Here's the file I was talking about, Mom," he said. "The bank's digital forms. I'll walk you through it." He guided me as I entered my information. Name, address, account details. "This part," he said, "just connects your old account to the new one so the transfer's automatic. You'll get better interest, I promise." His tone was gentle but firm, the tone of someone who knows best. I hesitated for a second, then clicked, confirm. That night, I felt oddly uneasy. Nothing concrete, just a heaviness in my chest. I told myself it was silly. Ethan was family now. Why would he ever hurt me? December arrived with its glittering lights and cold winds. Anna seemed distracted during our Christmas dinner, her smile thinner than usual. When I asked if everything was all right, she said she was just tired from work. Ethan raised his glass. "To family," he said. I smiled back, trying to ignore the shadow in her eyes. In January, I went to withdraw some money to help a neighbor whose husband had fallen ill. The teller frowned as she typed into her computer. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Turner," she said. "It seems your account is empty." Empty. I remember staring at her lips as she said the word, as if it couldn't possibly mean what I thought it did. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Check again." She did. Twice. The balance remained the same. 0. The next hours were a blur of phone calls, confusion, disbelief. My savings, Peter's savings, every dollar we had built over decades, it was all gone. When I called Anna, she sounded panicked. "Mom, I'm sure there's a mistake. Let me ask Ethan. He's good with this stuff." But when she called back later that night, her voice trembled. "He said it was a market issue. The funds were moved but should come back soon." I knew then something was terribly wrong. Markets don't swallow life savings whole. Not without a trace. Days turned into a nightmare. Ethan stopped answering my calls. Anna avoided coming over. When I finally went to their house, she met me at the door, eyes red, hands shaking. "He said not to worry," she kept repeating. I looked past her shoulder. Ethan was gone. I called the bank again. This time, a fraud specialist explained what had happened. The transfers had been made under my name, digitally signed and verified from my own devices. "Whoever had access to your accounts and email could have done it easily," the specialist said gently. My stomach sank. I thought of the day Ethan brought that USB drive, the forms I had filled out under his guidance. My trust had signed my ruin. I went home in silence. The house felt colder than it had after Peter's funeral. Every wall, every photo, seemed to echo the same question. How could he? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window and watched the snow falling under the streetlight. Somewhere in that quiet, disbelief turned to anger, and anger to resolve. I had been fooled, yes, but I wasn't finished. I had lost my savings, but not my will. Ethan had underestimated the wrong woman, and that was the night I decided I would get everything back. The next morning, I went to Anna's house. I didn't call first. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too badly to hold the phone. When she opened the door, she looked smaller somehow, pale, tired, like she hadn't slept either. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Where is he?" I asked. She hesitated. "He's gone to see his mother. She's been unwell." I stared at her. His mother? Or his accomplice? Her eyes widened. "Mom, what are you saying?" I took a deep breath. "Every cent of my savings is gone, Anna. The transfers were made under my name, from my laptop, the same one he used. He had access to everything." She sank into a chair, covering her mouth with her hands. "No, Ethan wouldn't." "He did," I said quietly. "And he didn't do it alone. Someone helped him. Someone who knew how to make it look clean." Anna shook her head, but the tears came anyway. She reached for her phone, dialed his number, and waited. It went to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Over the next few days, she called everyone she could think of. His office, his friends, even his mother. No one had seen him. Finally, a week later, she received a short message. "Don't look for me. It's complicated. Tell your mother I'm sorry." Sorry. One word, so small it barely took space on the screen, yet heavy enough to crush what was left of my heart. The police opened a fraud investigation, but their tone told me not to expect miracles. "He's probably offshore by now," one officer said. "These cases can take months, sometimes years." Months turned into a blur. Bills piled up. My retirement fund was gone. The small inheritance Peter left me had vanished with it. I started selling things, first jewelry, then furniture, then the car. Every object I parted with felt like cutting away another piece of the life I'd built. Anna moved back in with me. She was broken, carrying guilt she didn't deserve. I never blamed her. She had been deceived as much as I had, maybe even more. I watched her at night, sitting by the window where I used to sit, her eyes lost somewhere far away. Sometimes she'd whisper, "I loved him, Mom. How could he do this?" I never had an answer. People talk about heartbreak as if it's loud, shouting, crying, breaking things. But the real kind is quiet. It sits inside you like a stone, cold and heavy. One evening, I went through old folders, looking for any trace of correspondence. Emails, bank notifications, anything that could explain how he'd done it. And then I found it, a chain of messages between Ethan and another person. At first, I didn't recognize the name. Then I read further and my blood ran cold. It was his mother. The woman who'd smiled at me at their wedding, who'd called me dear, and brought me homemade jam every Christmas. Her messages were clear. She had helped him set up offshore accounts, coached him through fake documentation, even advised him on how to make the digital signatures look legitimate. My hands trembled as I printed everything. Every message, every line. She had known from the start. She had blessed his betrayal. I took the papers to the detective in charge, a man named Lawson. He skimmed through the pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. "This changes things," he said. "You've got more evidence than most cases we see. We'll issue warrants." That night, I told Anna. She listened in silence, her face blank. Then she whispered, "She was supposed to be my second mother. She chose her son over your soul," I said. "Let her live with that." Weeks later, the police tracked Ethan down. He hadn't left the country, just moved to another state, living under a different name. He was arrested in a motel near Dallas, found with 2 laptops, several fake IDs, and cash hidden in a suitcase. When they told me, I felt nothing. No triumph, no relief. Just exhaustion. His mother was charged as an accomplice to fraud. She pleaded guilty almost immediately, perhaps thinking cooperation would save her son. For Anna and me, the trial was torture. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to the lawyers dissect every detail of our lives, felt like being stripped bare. Ethan's defense tried to argue that I had authorized the transfers willingly, that I was trying to avoid taxes. I almost laughed in disbelief. But when my turn came to testify, something inside me steadied. I stood before the court, my voice calm but unshakable. I trusted him because he was my family. He knew that trust was sacred to me, and he used it as a weapon. The room was silent. For the first time since it all began, I saw Ethan look down. His mask of arrogance slipped, and for a moment, I thought I saw shame. But maybe it was just fear. When the verdict was read, Anna gripped my hand. Guilty. Both of them. He was sentenced to prison for 8 years. His mother got 5. Afterward, Anna sobbed into my shoulder. "It's over," she said. I held her close and whispered, "No, my love. It's just beginning." Because while justice had been served on paper, something deeper had ignited inside me. The woman who had once been naive and soft-hearted was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, wiser, and stronger. The court gave me the right to pursue restitution, to recover what had been stolen. But beyond the money, I wanted something far greater. I wanted to rebuild my dignity, piece by piece, until no one could ever take it from me again. That was the moment I began planning, not for revenge and anger, but for justice and peace. I would reclaim everything Ethan thought he had destroyed. Not by matching his deceit, but by rising above it. And as I watched him being led away in handcuffs, a strange calm settled over me. He had taken my savings, yes, but I still had something he never could, my integrity. That was my first real victory. Justice on paper is one thing, but real justice, the kind that seeps into your bones, comes later, quietly, through the choices you make after the storm. When the trial ended and the reporters left, I found myself standing outside the courthouse, holding the final judgment papers in my hand. I should have felt closure. Instead, I felt an empty ache where my life used to be. Ethan was behind bars, his mother too, but their shadows lingered in every corner of my mind. Every bill I paid reminded me of the savings they stole. Every letter from the court about restitution felt like a reminder of how close I had come to losing everything. I knew I had to rebuild, not just financially, but from within. The first step was to reclaim my own name. I called the bank, the mortgage company, every institution that had ever handled my accounts. I had them remove every connection, every authorized user, every link to Ethan's digital footprint. I replaced my devices, changed every password, and attended financial literacy seminars meant for young professionals. I was the oldest person in the room, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to be anyone's victim again. At first, Anna didn't understand why I was doing all this. She thought I was torturing myself with reminders of what we'd lost. But I wasn't. I was arming myself with knowledge, the kind I should have had years ago. I began investing again, cautiously this time, small steps that gave me back a sense of control. And slowly, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. One evening, a letter arrived from the prison. It was from Ethan. He wrote that he was sorry, that he had made a mistake, that prison had changed him. He asked me to visit. I read the letter once, then again, and then I tore it neatly into pieces. Some apologies are only meant to soothe the guilty, not to heal the hurt. Instead of responding, I made another decision. I would use everything I had learned, the pain, the humiliation, the loss, and turn it into purpose. I reached out to the Women's Association in town and proposed starting a small foundation to help victims of financial fraud. At first, it was just an idea on paper. But when the director heard my story, she smiled sadly and said, "You've got the fire for it. Let's make it happen." Within months, we had a name: the Phoenix Trust. A fund for women who'd been deceived by those they trusted most: husbands, partners, sons, even family. We offered legal aid, counseling, and workshops on financial safety. The first session had only 5 women. A year later, we had 50. The work healed me in ways I hadn't expected. Every time I saw a woman walk into that room with her shoulders hunched and leave standing a little taller, I felt a piece of my spirit return. Pain had taught me empathy, and empathy had become my armor. Meanwhile, I kept track of Ethan's restitution payments. The court required him to send a portion of his prison wages toward repayment. The amounts were laughable, pennies compared to what he'd stolen, but I deposited every one of them into a separate account. Not because I needed the money, but because I wanted every cent of his remorse to become the foundation for something better. One morning, Anna came into my study holding an envelope. "You've been invited," she said, smiling, "to speak at the National Women's Finance Summit. They want you to share your story." I froze. The idea of standing on a stage and reopening that wound terrified me. But then I thought of the countless women still suffering in silence, still blaming themselves for trusting the wrong people. I agreed. The day of the event, I stood backstage, clutching my notes. My heart raced. The lights dimmed, the announcer said my name, and I stepped into the spotlight. I was a woman who believed trust was unbreakable. I began. I was wrong. But what I learned is that even when trust shatters, you can still rebuild, stronger, wiser, and free. I told them everything: the deception, the court, the pain, and the rise. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began, soft at first, then thunderous. I looked out and saw faces shining with tears. That was the moment I realized my revenge wasn't about punishing Ethan anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice. Months passed, and the Phoenix Trust grew beyond anything I'd imagined. Donations poured in. News outlets covered our work. One article called me the woman who rose from ruin. I laughed when I read that headline, but deep down, I knew it was true. I had risen. Not because I was fearless, but because I had faced my fear and kept walking anyway. Then, one autumn evening, I received a call from a lawyer representing Ethan's mother. She was out on parole and wanted to meet. I hesitated, but curiosity won. We met in a small cafe near the courthouse, the same one where I'd once met Karen, my lawyer. Linda looked older, frilier. Her hands trembled as she stirred her coffee. "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness," she said. "I came to say I was wrong. I thought I was helping my son, but I destroyed him, and you." I listened quietly. There was no anger left in me, only a strange calm. "You didn't destroy me," I said finally. "You taught me how to rebuild." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. When she left, I watched her walk away, shoulders bent under the weight of her own choices. I didn't feel hatred, only pity. A few weeks later, I received another letter from the prison, Ethan again. This time, he said he'd been reading about the Phoenix Trust, that he'd seen my speech online. He said he was proud of me. Proud. The word made me laugh out loud. The audacity of it. Still, I didn't tear this one up. I placed it in a drawer, a reminder of who I used to be and who I had become. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about living so fully that those who tried to break you are forced to watch you soar. By the time Ethan was eligible for parole, I had built a new life, one I controlled entirely. When the parole hearing came, the board asked if I wanted to attend. I declined. I didn't need to see him again. My silence would speak louder than any testimony. Instead, I spent that day at the Phoenix Trust, helping a woman fill out the forms to reclaim her stolen inheritance. When she signed the papers, she looked up at me and whispered, "Do you ever stop feeling broken?" I smiled. You don't stop feeling it. You just learn to build something stronger from the pieces. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the city lights flickering like fireflies below. Somewhere out there, Ethan was counting the days until his release. But I wasn't counting anymore. My life was no longer measured by what he took. It was defined by what I'd rebuilt. He had stolen my savings, but I had stolen back my power. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. The day Ethan walked out of prison, the sky was gray. The news reported it briefly, just another release on a long list of forgotten names. For a moment, a part of me expected a letter, a message, something that would mark the end of that story. But nothing came, and that silence felt like a gift. By then, the Phoenix Trust had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We had offices in 3 states, a full staff, and partnerships with financial institutions that helped women rebuild their credit after betrayal. Every corner of our headquarters carried a piece of my journey. The first check we received from a donor hung framed on the wall. The faded photograph of my old house, the one Ethan and Anna had once lived in, sat on my desk, not as a reminder of loss, but as proof of how far I had come. Anna had changed, too. She had rebuilt her own life quietly, moving to another city and starting a new job. Our relationship, once cracked by anger and grief, had become something fragile but real again. We didn't talk about Ethan often, but sometimes, in rare moments, she would sigh and say, "Mom, I should have seen it." And I would tell her the same thing every time. Trust isn't a mistake. It's a gift. Some people just don't know how to handle it. Justice had come in layers. The court had sentenced Ethan and Linda. The restitution payments still trickled in every month, but they were symbolic now, reminders that the law had acknowledged my pain. Yet the deeper justice, the kind that reshapes your life, came quietly, without witnesses. It came in the mornings when I woke up without dread. It came when I looked at my bank statements and saw security instead of fear. It came in the laughter that filled the office of the Phoenix Trust whenever one of our women celebrated her victory. One afternoon, I was invited to a private charity gala in New York. The theme was Women Who Rebuilt. As I stepped into the grand ballroom, I felt a quiet awe at the rows of tables, the soft glow of chandeliers, the hum of voices filled with resilience. A young woman approached me, her eyes bright. "You're Margaret Lowell," she said. "The Phoenix Trust saved my mother's life. She always says your story gave her hope." I smiled, my throat tightening. "Then tell her she's part of mine now." That night, I gave a speech. I spoke not about Ethan or the theft or even the pain, but about what comes after. The rebuilding, the slow return of strength, the beauty of survival. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous. It was steady, warm, human. And in that sound, I heard everything I had fought for. A week later, while sorting through mail at the office, I found a small, plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. It was a short note in handwriting I recognized instantly. "Thank you for not destroying me when you could have," it said. "I'm trying to live differently now. I hope you are happy." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. For a long time, I stared at that paper. Then I placed it in the same drawer as the first letter he had sent years ago. Both of them belonged to the past, and that was exactly where they would stay. Months turned into years. The Phoenix Trust became a national organization. Young women joined our ranks, some of them survivors, some just dreamers who believed in the mission. I watched them grow, teach, and lead, and I knew that one day, even when I was gone, this legacy would live on. Sometimes, when I stood by the office window late at night, I'd look out at the city lights and think about the strange, twisted path that had brought me here. If Ethan hadn't betrayed me, none of this would exist. I would still be the quiet, trusting woman who believed that safety came from others. Instead, I learned that safety comes from within, from resilience, from courage, from learning to stand on your own feet no matter how many times you fall. I didn't hate him anymore. Hatred was too heavy a burden. What I felt was gratitude, sharp, reluctant, but real. Because in taking everything from me, he had unknowingly given me the one thing I needed most, myself. One winter morning, I visited the old courthouse again. Not for a trial, not for revenge, just to walk those halls one last time. The marble floors still echoed with footsteps, the air still held that faint scent of paper and old wood. As I stood outside courtroom 3, the same place where I had once sat trembling, waiting for justice, I smiled. I wasn't that woman anymore. A young clerk passed by and paused. "Are you here for a case, ma'am?" he asked. "No," I said, turning toward the sunlight streaming through the window. "I'm just visiting an old memory." He nodded politely and walked on, and I stood there for a moment longer, letting the silence settle. Then I left, closing the door behind me. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind of cold that wakes you up fully. I walked down the courthouse steps, feeling the weight of the years lift from my shoulders. Life wasn't about the things we lost. It was about what we chose to build after. When I reached the street, my phone buzzed. It was Anna. "Mom," she said, her voice warm, "we just got a huge donation for the Phoenix Trust. They want to name the new center after you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My eyes blurred, and I smiled through the tears. "Tell them no," I finally said. "Name it after all of us. Every woman who ever had to start over." As I hung up, I looked up at the sky. It had cleared completely now, blue and wide and endless. That was the moment I knew my story was no longer about betrayal or revenge. It was about rebirth. About the strength that comes from surviving the fire and realizing you were never meant to be ashes, you were meant to be the flame. And that was the true justice I had been searching for all along. Years passed. Seasons turned quietly, and so did I. The woman who once trembled at betrayal had become someone unrecognizable, not hardened, not cold, but complete. My hair had turned silver, my hands carried lines of labor and love, and my heart had settled into peace. The world around me kept moving. The Phoenix Trust had expanded across the country. What began as a small idea in a courtroom hallway had become a beacon for thousands. Every week, I still received letters, some from women who had been deceived, others from daughters thanking us for saving their mothers. Some letters came with photos, smiling faces, rebuilt homes, families standing together again. They always ended the same way. You gave us hope. But I knew the truth. They had given themselves hope. I had only shown them it was possible. Anna often visited on weekends. She'd bring her children, and the house would fill with laughter again. Her little girl, Sophie, once asked, "Grandma, what's the phoenix?" I told her, "It's a bird that rises from ashes when everything else is gone. It's what we all can be when we refuse to stay broken." She nodded, thoughtful, and went back to her toys, as if she already understood. One evening, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset stain the sky gold. The air smelled like rain and earth. It reminded me of the day I discovered everything was gone, the day my savings disappeared, the day my trust shattered. The same world, the same sky, yet I was entirely different. Time hadn't erased the pain, it had simply given it meaning. People sometimes asked me if I ever truly forgave Ethan. I never answered that directly. Forgiveness isn't something you announce, it's something you live. I no longer carried anger, and that was enough. He had his road to walk, and I had mine. Maybe someday he would find peace too, but his peace was no longer my responsibility. As I grew older, I began writing my story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a guide. Each chapter carried lessons carved from experience. How to recognize deceit, how to rebuild your finances, how to trust again without losing yourself. The book was published quietly, without much expectation. Yet within months, it reached thousands of readers. Messages poured in. Women wrote about finding courage in those pages. Men wrote about understanding what betrayal really costs. I realized then that the story which had once broken me had now become my greatest gift. One afternoon, I received an invitation from the governor's office. The Phoenix Trust was to be honored with an award for outstanding social impact. I stood on that stage in front of a room full of leaders, cameras flashing, and thought of the woman I had been, sitting in a courtroom, shaking, clutching papers she didn't understand. And I thought of the woman I had become, standing tall, unafraid, no longer a victim of anyone's choices. When I stepped down from the stage, I caught sight of Anna in the crowd. She was clapping, eyes glistening, her daughter beside her. And in that moment, I understood that my victory wasn't mine alone. It was hers too. It was every woman's who had been silenced and found her voice again. Later that night, as I drove home, I took a detour, a small, winding road leading to the neighborhood where my old house once stood. The place where it all began. The house was gone now, replaced by a modern duplex. But the oak tree in the front yard was still there, older and stronger. I parked the car and sat quietly, looking at it through the windshield. I remembered the mornings I used to sit under that tree with a cup of coffee, thinking life was simple, predictable, safe. I smiled softly. Life had never been simple. But maybe it wasn't meant to be. Maybe we grow through the fire precisely so that we can light the way for others. Before leaving, I whispered a silent goodbye, not to the house, but to the woman who once lived there. She deserved her rest. I had carried her story far enough. Years later, when my time began to slow, I appointed a new director for the Phoenix Trust, a young woman named Maria, whose husband had once gambled away their savings. She had rebuilt her life through the foundation, and now she carried its mission forward. During her first day, she came to see me. "How did you do it?" she asked. "How did you keep going when everything fell apart?" I smiled. "I stopped trying to forget the pain," I told her. "I used it. I let it become the bricks for something better. After she left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by framed letters and photographs, faces of women who had rebuilt their worlds. I thought about the circle life had drawn, how betrayal had led to strength, how ruin had led to rebirth, how revenge had transformed into something far greater, justice through purpose. That night, I wrote one last entry in my journal. When I was broken, I thought revenge would heal me. But revenge was only the beginning. The real healing came when I learned that the most powerful thing a woman can do is rise, not to destroy what hurt her, but to build something beautiful from the ashes. I closed the journal and placed it on my desk. The wind outside rustled softly, like pages turning. I looked up at the moonlight spilling through the window and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Ethan's story had ended long ago. Mine was still unfolding, not in courts or headlines, but in every woman who dared to start again. That, I realized, was my legacy. Not the money I lost, not even the foundation I built, but the courage I passed on. And as the night settled in around me, I smiled, a quiet, content smile, knowing that the world, cruel as it can be, had also given me the one gift worth everything, the chance to begin again and end on my own terms. The flame still burned, steady and bright. And this time, it was mine alone.